All right, welcome. Good afternoon, or whatever time of day it is that you're watching this. I just wanted to go over a couple of things now that we've completed the first week. And if you saw my announcement yesterday, you knew I was going to post this sometime today. So, for those of you that don't know, I was traveling to North Carolina yesterday, and I'll be there basically for the next 2 weeks. Um, Obviously, still accessible by email, just spending time with extended family. Um, so, great job getting through the first week. Let's go ahead and get that out there. I do want to go over a couple of points. Number one, when it comes to grading, there were a handful of you that submitted two documents. My sort of philosophy is unless you tell me otherwise, I grade the second one because I assume there was no reason for you to re-upload unless you had fixed something or added something or changed something that you wanted evaluated differently than the first one. So there's that. Um, I do want to say I realized I had a couple of people ask questions. I had a couple of people make comments as they went to submit that the instructions were obviously not clear to them. So let me, and I think I put this in the announcement, but let me say it again just so that we understand. These responses, where you're reading some sort of stimulus, you're reading some sort of article, in 300, you're going to use 300 words basically to reply to that. Now, it's not like I'm not counting words. I want you to understand that. If it's a well thought out, well developed, and it's 250 words, you're fine. If it's 350 words, you're fine. If it's 100 words, the reality is you don't have anything well developed. You haven't explained yourself. You haven't defended your position. Um, you haven't fully addressed the topic. If we get past 400 words, I will just stop reading. Um, and at that point, I will grade you basically on the first 400 words, and therefore, if it's incomplete, then it'll be incomplete. So please try to limit that. Many years ago, I had a overzealous student that turned in a short response that was 4.5 pages, I think. That's not the purpose of this. In fact, one of the things that you might find ironic listening to my videos, but one of the things that I want to instill in my students is the importance of being concise, brevity, being able to get your point across efficiently with limited sort of waste. Um, so that's that. Um, the short responses, I don't really grade for grammar. Um, so I do want you to understand. I might make a comment on there like, "Hey, you had a grammatical error or two." If it was a grammatical error or two, and I could understand what you were trying to say, I can fill in the gaps and we move on in life. If there's a ton of errors, then that obviously makes it more difficult to read what you've written and can negatively affect it. The formal paper, your dissenting opinion paper, which is week 3, will require more of that attention to grammatical issues. Um, and then I'll say this as far as your grammar goes. Um, One, treat your paper as if you were writing to a sort of a fellow freshman in college, right? I don't expect you to explain things as if you were explaining them to a third grader, um, but you also can't make the assumption um, that your audience is has a PhD in political science and is fully versed in whatever it is that you're talking about. So make sure that happens. Um, Additionally, with the short responses, what I am looking for, and this is where a number of you would have gotten marked down. Um, I I've read the articles obviously because I assigned them. I actually go back and reread them from time to time just to refresh my own memory. Obviously, I should have it at the front of my mind before I go to grade your response to these things. Um, But what I'm looking for is your response, your opinion. I don't want you to restate from, right, or whoever the author is. The point here is for you to take the information that they have provided and provide some sort of response to it, right? And what I tell my face-to-face students, what I tell my students that I have for a full semester, and we do this in depth, ultimately what I really want out of you is strong opinions loosely held, which simply means I want you to have an opinion. I want you to be strong in your opinion. I want you to defend your opinion. But then I want you to understand that in the event that your opinion is factually inaccurate, then reevaluate and drop an opinion that turns out to be a bad opinion. Um, so, that being said, I also need you to understand two other things as it comes to the grading of this. One, I'm a contrarian by nature, which means that if you tell me that healthcare is a public good that ought to be provided by the government, I'll explain to you why it ought to be a private commodity that's bought and sold on an open market. If you tell me that it's a private commodity that ought to be bought and sold on a private market, I'll explain to you why it's a public good that ought to be provided by the government. Um, I do that not to try to be mean. I'm a very blunt person. All right, I apologize. I was in the military. I'm not what generally people call warm and cuddly. I don't mean to attack you, so please don't ever take that personally. And understand that I will make comments, make statements, make arguments that I don't necessarily think are the best argument. The reality is the very first paper that you wrote, I think he's wrong on a number of factors, right? Um, for instance, let's take gerrymandering. Here's as an example. Now, that's not to say that gerrymandering is not a problem. Gerrymandering is a problem, but it's not the problem that he thinks that it is. Okay. Um, in fact, he misunderstands the problem of gerrymandering drastically, right? Because he says, oh, well, because of gerrymandering, the party that actually won, they don't get the right number of seats. Well, if we just go back to our last midterm election, right, take out a presidential election, but in 2022, Republicans received 51.4% of all votes for the House of Representatives, and they earned 51% of the seats. That seems pretty fair to me, right? If you take all the votes in America across the totality of America, they got 51.4% of the votes, they got 51% of the seats, right? That doesn't seem like gerrymandering has created an issue. Now it has. And if we had more time, I would explain to you. I unfortunately don't. Um, and I don't get you face to face, and I don't get to be able to explain some of these things to you in nuanced detail, because gerrymandering is a problem, but it's not a problem in terms of picking Republicans and Democrats. It's a problem in terms of picking which Republicans and which Democrats. So understand that. Couple of other points, right? Because obviously he mentioned that. A number of you mentioned the idea of swing states, which is a valid point, but I would tell you this. Um, if we went to a national popular vote, um, there would still be a whole bunch of people in America that were forgotten, that were not campaigned to, that candidates wouldn't show up. Yeah, right now they show up to like the 6, maybe 7 um, swing states that we have, right? Depending on what year it is or how we're counting that, there's as few as 5 swing states or as many as 8. I tend to put 7 in there. And if you're curious, if you just didn't know and you'd like to know, the the ones that are swing states really are Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and I'm probably putting them in order of how much they'll swing. Um, Michigan, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and then Nevada. And then if there's an 8th, it's Iowa, but Iowa's been fairly Republican as of late. And just a fun fact about swing states, they change drastically. When I was your age, the two largest swing states, the two swingiest of swing states, however you want to say it, the two states that were what we would call, what political scientists call the deepest purple, meaning they're a mixture of red and blue, were Florida and Ohio, which are both very Republican states today and are not swing states anymore. So one, it's worth understanding that over the course of time, swing states change. Two, if we got rid of the Electoral College, candidates would actually spend their time in some of you, many of you live in Fort Bend County. Fort Bend County is a county of 100,000 people. No, sorry, county of 1,000,000 people. There's nearly 1,000,000 people in Fort Bend County now. It is incredibly diverse, both ethnically and intellectually, and then therefore it tends to be very diverse politically. I think you'd get a lot of candidates showing up to Fort Bend County. Where I come from, Nicholas County, West Virginia, nobody's coming. Nobody's going to show up, right? When I was a child, Nicholas County voted Democrat in every single election. They vote Republican in every single election now, right? But where I come from, you're talking about a high school for an entire county, and the high school has like 350 kids in it. Okay, nobody's showing up because nobody lives there, right? Nobody's going to Wyoming. Nobody's going to Kansas, right? Nobody's going anywhere rural where you don't have any sort of population density. Interestingly enough, though, you're probably also not going to have a lot of people showing up into like downtown Manhattan, even though there's, I don't know, 10 million people that live in Manhattan, because that area is still predominantly Democratic, right? So you wouldn't have swing states, you would have swing counties or swing cities, towns, whatever. Okay? So just understand that if we got rid of the Electoral College, like candidates would care about everybody equally. No, they wouldn't. Nope, they wouldn't. They just wouldn't. They're not going to care about people that they know aren't going to vote for them. They're just not. Okay. Couple of other things that I wrote down in my notes. It's worth noting, and again, the Frum piece that I had you read, I do disagree with some of his conclusions, and I could have easily assigned a different thing that I used to assign to previous classes from a professor at Texas A&M who wrote a book called America's Failing Experiment, where he's actually argued that the increases in democracy that we have are actually what has caused the problems, not a lack of democracy, right? You have to realize that when we created this nation, the only people that were capable of voting were land-owning males of a certain age and had to have a certain amount of property. You couldn't just own a tiny little bit of land and then pretend like you got to vote. You were not equal. And over the course of time, we had, universal male suffrage or universal white male suffrage, right? Universal male suffrage, universal female suffrage. We dropped the voting age all the way down to 18. We have the direct election of senators. Now, we've done action after action after action that has actually increased democracy in the United States, and I'm not sure it's better. I'm not. Some of you made the argument in your papers that, we did that because of a poorly informed electorate, right? And I think I made the comment in one of your papers, if you went and read the little sticky note comments that I put in there, right? How well are we convinced that we're informed today? I mean, we have a large number of Americans that think Donald Trump colluded with Russia in 2016, which has absolutely been proven false. And we have a large number of Americans today that think Michelle Obama's a man. These are not well-informed people, but they have the right to vote. So again, I don't know that Madison's wrong. Even though we have nearly an unlimited amount of information accessible at our fingertips, are we really that well informed? The only other things that I can think of, I did want to touch on the political spectrum test real fast. I know there were a couple of you that sent me a screenshot You did not go down and get your certificate, and I did give you 0 for it. But for those of you that submitted the wrong thing, if you go back and email me the correct thing, I will fix your grade, okay? Because you tried. And again, I realized that my face-to-face course, it actually has the images in there, and so it's not, the images were not there showing you exactly what I wanted or exactly where to go to find it. So again, that's a me problem. So I'll absolutely take the correct grade from you whenever you get it to me, because you were absolutely on time, and so there's no issue there. The other thing I want to say about the political spectrum test is it's worth understanding that all political spectrum tests are flawed. I've over the course of my to 10 plus years, whatever it's been now that I've been teaching government, whether AP or college or dual credit, or as an actual adjunct professor, I've assigned a wide variety of political spectrum tests, and they're not great. I like the one you just took because it's at least two-dimensional. The left-right linear political spectrum test is terrible, because the reality is that communists and fascists are way more alike than they are different in many ways. But the linear political spectrum, the one that just goes left right, will put fascists all the way on the right and communists all the way on the left, as if they're the furthest from each other as humanly possible. But they're both incredibly authoritarian, right? They both absolutely dictate all of your behaviors to you, which makes them very, very similar. So this one's at least somewhat better. That being said, it's also kind of comical that you have a true square, right? The reality is you cannot be in the top right corner of that square. So if you were to look at the actual square, if you were to go back like +10, +10, you can't be there. You can't. You cannot be that authoritarian and believe that, which is the y-axis. Y-axis goes up and down. I don't teach math for a reason, right? You cannot be all the way at the top of the y-axis, which means you are 100% authoritarian and you believe that the government ought to dictate behaviors to individuals, right? And be all the way to the right on the economic scale, where you believe in a free economy, okay? Can't have a free economy with a dictatorship. It can't happen, right? Subsequently, you cannot be in the bottom left, right? Because you cannot have freedom, right? And which is almost anarchism down at the very bottom there, right? That's libertarianism, or the idea of absolute freedom. And then a socialist economy, because socialism does not allow for freedom, right? Literally, socialism does not allow for private property, right? You're not free to own anything. You're not free to your own labor. You're not free to your own actions, okay? So just realize that. And then I would tell you that obviously, if you're looking at it, and you look at where they plot some of those people, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, what was the British guy's name? Corbyn, I think. Corbyn is a self-professed socialist, and they have him close to center in that third quadrant, whereas Donald Trump or J.D. Vance, they have all the way at the extreme in the upper right-hand corner, as almost as far away from the center as they can get. The reality is that's not accurate, unless you move the center to sort of between those two, where you're looking at the center being between the extreme positions. So it is worth noting that there's some flaws to that. There's a couple of others. There's a Politicube one that's actually three-dimensional, which is probably even better, but I don't assign it because I don't know that the questions would be fully understood. Here's what I will tell you about it, though, and this is what I was told by a very, very good friend of mine. Basically, anybody north of sort of 2 on the y-axis, right? Anybody up in the authoritarian era ought to be avoided, regardless of which side they're on, right? Anybody below the x-axis, if they're on the right side, you should join a business. You should open a business with them. If they're on the left side, you should start a band with them, which I think is actually probably a fairly good, overly simplistic way of explaining that. So I will continue grading the discussions. Um, keep working. If you have questions, please reach out to me. Um, I'm again generally pretty quick to get back to your emails. All right. Um, I think I think that's all that I have in my notes that I'm looking. There's a couple of other um, points in here that I have, but we'll leave it here. 20 minutes is about as long as I want to go on these. So thank you. I look forward to your continued work. And again, if you have questions, let me know.